It's another Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday, there's a woodpecker banging outside, and it's distracting. So Forgive's like, knock, 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 knock. It's like, oh my God. It's like the knock 4 times from Doctor Who. Anyway, talking today about feelings of safety and how I work with a lot of guys who have some permutation of, they talk about women being protected in society or women being safer in society, or seeing a lot of messages that, the society cares about women but not about men. And that translate into what I'm hearing from that is that men just don't feel safe. And that's a very real feeling. And first point, it's much more effective to go just, I don't feel safe in my day-to-day life. I feel that if something ever happened to me, I'd be totally on my own and no one would care. That is valid, and we can deal with that. When we get into comparative stuff, it becomes a big mess. And the problem with that is that we can't do anything about men, and we can't do anything about women. We can do something about you and your circumstances. And controlling what you can control is the first step to feeling safer. And I say this as someone, remember, I was diagnosed with PTSD in, I don't even remember the date anymore, trauma brain, but like 2012, 2013, went through all of this. And I remember feeling afraid all the time because there was no safety. There was no protection. The bottom could drop out and everybody would just tell me it was my fault. So this is what I did to get that feeling for the first time in my life, because I had to realize I never felt safe. I never felt like people would look out for me, have my back. And that went all the way back to childhood. So we're gonna deal with what you can do to help with that feeling, because you deserve to have help with that feeling. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. The coffee sessions help a lot with guys who are dealing with these issues. And if you would like some one-on-one support, sign up yourself. Link in the description box below, the Leanna Cares link. Fill it out. I'll get in touch with you. Okay, so it is some, if you feel physically unsafe, that's a serious thing. And the problem is so many men experience this stuff on a continuum of very subtle but very real abuse, where the abuser has convinced the victim that this is just the way the world is, toughen up. Because a lot of abuse of men directly attacks their masculinity. You're weak, you're worthless, you're not a man up. Real men wouldn't do this sort of thing. And that's a direct attack on identity. I, recommend you listen to the episode of It's Not Therapy last week on identity threats. Yeah, that's a real mindfuck. And unfortunately, a lot of abused men internalize the things their abuser said, that the world doesn't care. Well, the world doesn't care about you by proxy. You're a man. You should be able to handle this. And you can't. And so it feels very helpless and it feels very powerless. And overcoming that trauma is all about getting a sense that you have some control over your circumstances, and then being okay about the stuff you can't control, because you do feel safe enough. The stuff you can't control, that's okay. There's a bottom and there's a soft landing, right? So whenever we get into these conversations about men or about women, the categories are just too big. It's 50-ish% of the population, one way or the other. Whatever is said next is true for some, but not all, right? And really, the biggest thing that is the determinant is usually, but not always, socioeconomic standing, right? How much money you have access to. If you have a lot of money, you were probably, but not necessarily, more safe than if you didn't. Now, the reason I say not necessarily is because, I don't know if anybody saw the stuff with Elon Musk and his trans daughter, and his daughter insists that Elon wasn't around, and when he was around, he was a pretty terrible bully and trying to force her into this mold of masculinity that she just didn't fit in. And then he claimed that a 16-year-old tricked him into signing medical papers, which, dude, you're supposed to have an IQ of what, like 160 or something like that. No one believes that. You weren't tricked. Like, come on. You were given the papers. You knew what was going on. You weren't tricked. Enough with this woke mind virus. You were a shitty dad. And he might be great to his kids now, but in this case, he had a really, really rigid sense of masculinity, and he thought he could bully his kid into conforming. And, she happened to be trans. But a lot of guys just aren't that kind of man. And I do think that while I used to talk a lot about how we have to broaden the concept of what's properly feminine, we also have to broaden the concept of what's properly masculine. And I mean, that's why it's cool that they're doing a semi-loyal adaptation of the Dune movies. Because, I mean, the conclusion of Paul Atreides' story in the books, that talks a lot about that. And then, I mean, just the example that Joe Biden set stepping aside, and of course Trump immediately went, he was weak, he was terrible, crooked, all that stuff, he cheated. But no, he overcame his ego, went, fair or not, my position here is untenable. I have to make the smart choice. And, everybody's saying, oh, he's so great now. And I guarantee you he's sitting there going, sons of bitches. Like, you shanked me and congratulated me for bleeding. Fuck you. But he still probably did what was in the best interest of the country. And he'll be fine, is the thing. He's got an excellent legacy as a public servant. He was part of some major societal innovations as a legislator. He made some mistakes too, but, he was part of that video games Badum K thing in the early to mid 90s. But he's also the one that spearheaded the studies that conclusively prove that video games don't cause violence. He was on that task force under Obama that did all those studies that came out, whoops, no, they don't. There's an evolution for somebody, right? And the thing that Biden models that Trump doesn't, sorry, Trumpers who watch my content, but these things are just true about Trump. He uses a lot of inherently abusive language when he calls people failures, losers, suckers. Like, instead of it being a mistake they made, something they did, it becomes something they are. And that's inherently abusive language. And if you were talked to that way in your formative years, if you're still being talked to that way, and a lot of women talk to the men in their lives this way, right? Instead of it being a weak moment, you're weak overall. People are raised to talk this way, and it's not okay, right? You can say somebody's doing something now, even that someone has a pattern of behavior without attacking their identity, right? Because if you call a weak person weak, is it going to make them any stronger? No. You build somebody up by, not telling them they did right when they did wrong, but also being able to connect to their strengths. And every day I work with somebody who has no ability to say what they're good at, right? Everybody's good at something. And so many people have been convinced that they're not really good at anything. And unfortunately, the various, movements have convinced women that men have all these magical things given to them that women don't. And men are convinced that women are given all these magical things and they're safe and protected. And that is just, in both cases, it's certainly not true across the board. In my opinion, it's not true for the vast majority. That in each case, you're comparing the ideal experience to the more common one, right? So men compare the more common experience for men, which is they're ground up, like their beef being made in a hamburger, and compare it to the ideal experience for women where, here's this person who is put up on this pedestal and told they're wonderful and given all these things and kept safe and told they're good. And I don't personally know any woman who's had that experience, but there are guys who are convinced that that is the norm for women. And it's just not. Every day somebody tells me I'm a piece of shit, and that is not an exaggeration. So for all these people, what do you know? You're a woman. I know what it's like to be shit on. I know what it's like to be told I'm worthless. I definitely know what it's like being told I'm not going to amount to anything. That came from family members. I know what it's like to be called weak and frightened. And frightened is not a bad thing. And unfortunately, when my dad wanted a boy, so he raised me like one, and it was rough. And he made me think that being frightened was weakness. Instead of being frightened gives you an opportunity to be brave. But denying the fear doesn't make it go away, right? So that is what I had to realize, that we externalize this idea that, there's other people that get it great, and it's some systemic thing that we can rail against, and we can't. That's too big. And that's why I pivoted from, I tried the larger forces, through games journalism to try to give people a better opinion of gaming and gamers. And it just, nobody listened to me. Well, some people did listen to me. You guys listened to me. But in terms of the industry, they didn't want that kind of content. And that's fine, right? If they don't want that kind of content, I'll go somewhere that does. And it's interesting because content where women are centered, like romantasy novels, they're more than happy to talk about good but imperfect men. Funny that, right? And we can talk about, somebody asked about a video on games journalism, and maybe I can do that on Wednesday or something like that. Give myself a bit more time to noodle it. But it doesn't make sense to me that the press for a hobby shits on the core reader base. It's never made sense to me. And that doesn't mean you don't challenge the material. But when you're taking direct swipes at the people reading and assuming a lot of negative things instead of assuming positive things and appealing to people's better angels, well, it doesn't make any sense to me because it's not effective, right? So, okay, what can you do to feel safer and protected? And one, don't just reject everything I'm saying here, because this, if you actually go and pay a lot of money, you know, therapy is $200 a session these days. That's why I started doing what I'm doing. It's a lot cheaper. And again, the reason I started doing what I was doing is I was paying, it wasn't that much, but it was like $125 at the time, every week to hear the same fucking thing. Control what you can control. And one of the things you really have to control is who you give access to you. Because that group of people is going to impact your entire view of the world. And if you've got people around you who are cutting you up and shitting on you and making you feel like you're worthless, does it really matter what the greater world is when you're immediately surrounded with people like that? Not really, right? The thing that really matters, because, you know, if someone's really friggin' rich, does it really matter if the economy's in recession? No, it's not gonna affect them at all. It doesn't matter how bad things get. Super rich people are insulated. So if you're socially rich, it doesn't matter what happens to the rest of the world. You'll be okay. This is what things like churches used to do for people. Offered them a community that could get them support in hard times. Unfortunately, churches now look for, a lot of churches, not my friend's church. I shouldn't say churches. I'm trying to be very, very careful when I talk about, dominant religious paradigm in North America, because I have wonderful friends who are Christians, including pastors, and they don't do this. But a lot of people get rejected when they need that kind of community at most. And unfortunately, a lot of secular communities have become just as dogmatic as we think of churches being. LGBTQ plus spaces are more dogmatic now than my friend's church. So, yikes. That social wealth will insulate you from all the other shocks. And when you've got that established, if you want to try to do outreach to make the greater world better, I mean, I do it, right? But I compare how much energy I have, how much, endurance I have for the negativity. I think about what it was like when I had shitty people around me compared to now when I have good people around me. And I had to get rid of the shitty people and be alone for a while to have the good people find me. And part of that was because the good people didn't want to hang around me when I was surrounded by lying backstabbers. And I didn't know they were lying backstabbers at the time. The backstabbing became clear when I walked away, and therefore I showed them my back. They were doing it then, right? But it got worse. Stalker Chan is part of that group that, because the PTS got so bad, because she was following me places and menacing me, I finally had to get therapy. It was, when I finally went to the police, she lied to them. And so they're like, it was a big mess. But what I did get connected to was victim services. And the victim services was how I got set up with a social worker that got me on the path to better. And that's the thing. There are services for men. They're just not called men's services, except in a few rare cases like Blue Door here. There are some men's services, but look for like men's services. Services will get you better search results than, say, support, or there are men's support groups, but they're usually separated by, grief, There are trauma groups, and really what you need is just a place to talk and a place to get some challenge, but support. Challenge can be very supportive, and it just involves being around people with some emotional skills. And I do think that there's not enough mentoring of men. We put all this stuff into women's leadership, and well, because there are specific challenges that we've identified. And the specific challenges for men, we know. It's a lack of friend support. Men have fewer friends than women, and that gap gets wider and wider and wider. But friends aren't guaranteed, right? You have to do what I did, which is look around and go, you know what? These people don't make me feel good about myself. So I have one remaining friend from that time, and I love him to death. Everybody else had to go, including some family members. There's a lot of people out there, I'm sure, who can relate to that. But that one friend and I are still friends to this day. And getting rid of the bad people allowed me to connect with good people. And I had to be really, really picky. I had to stop doing this. Well, I don't want to be judged, so I'm not going to judge the red flags in other people. Instead, I started going, I would not want someone to think I was a shit person and just hang around me because they think nobody else would have them, right? I'm going to apply the standards I'm willing to be held to other people. So if I fucked around, I'd be prepared to find out. If I let somebody down and they were pissed at me, I'd understand why. So I'm not gonna accept people, but I thought you'd understand, when they fucked me over. If somebody fucks me over enough times, they're gone. If somebody doesn't respect boundaries enough times, they're gone. And I find that's something a lot of guys are afraid to do. And so if anybody would like to share why they're afraid to do that stuff, that would be really helpful, because I'm sure there are a lot of different things that even I haven't heard yet. But creating that safety bubble, right? And sometimes it means changing your living circumstance. Because if you're with an abusive partner, or if you're with abusive family, of course you're not going to feel safe and protected, because you're not, right? It doesn't matter what the rest of the world does if you're being abused by your own household. And there's a lot of incredibly abusive, incredibly damaging behavior that is legal. And that doesn't mean that the world doesn't care about you. There are plenty of places out there, my community included, that do care. There's just only so much, because of things like parental rights, right? There's only so much that can be done. But people can listen. So, if you'd like to join the Discord, get some friendly faces there, get some people who get it. You can become a supporter, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for some use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. Invites go out to the Discord about the 5th of every month. That's when Patreon processing comes out. But there are a lot of local groups in your area. They might not be as nerdy, so they won't necessarily speak your language, and they may or may not be neurodivergent friendly, but they do exist. Please take advantage of them. Thanks for watching Manly Mondays.